that's what we want for our guts. We want this full refurbishment that can only be delivered by 16-8 scheme, 16 hours of fast, 8 hours of window during which you eat all your food. Alors, all your food with 2 meals, I would think, typically, and probably a snack in between. That makes a lot of sense. You could, of course, have 3 meals in that window. Alors, when is the best timing for scheduling those 8 hours? Well, I think you will have to take into account your social life, your constraints. Ideally, I think it's better to have those 8 hours synchronized with the course of the sun. Because, we are creatures governed by the course of the sun, and we should respect that. So it's probably better to have your food between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. rather than having a lunch at 12 noon or 1 p.m. and a later dinner. Which is where, and you will remember I mentioned the possibility to go up to 18.6, because then 18.6, well, yes, you can have a lunch and a reasonable dinner. You cannot be too happy to have a late dinner. Having food in the evening is never such a great idea. It's better to have your dinner very late afternoon, very early evening, but the later the dinner, the more fattening it will be. That's something clearly proven, and my senior nutritionist, Glenn Matten, is a big partisan of the chronology and avoiding having food too late in the day, in the evening. And he's perfectly right. But of course, you need to take into account your social life, your professional life, your family life, and there are a lot of reasons for which you may have to change those ideal timetables into something that works for you. You could also have some days where it's just impossible to juggle and stick to the intermittent fasting schedule, and then you skip. On that day, you may have a business breakfast, you may be traveling, you may know you will never have the time for a lunch, and you don't want to wait until the end of the day to have your first mouthful of food. Okay, well, on that day, you don't do intermittent fasting. You don't have to do it 7 days every week, okay? You can skip a day now and then. Not too often, but you can make exceptions. So that's pretty handy and useful. Alors, something important at this point to underline are the contraindications. There are some contraindications. Pregnancy, not conception, but pregnancy is for sure a contraindication, I would think. Now, of course, obey your hunger. If you were doing intermittent fasting before becoming pregnant, well, you can keep some of that, but if you get hungry, you eat. Hunger has a lot of merit. If you have a good diet and good lifestyle principles, hunger will always be something to respect. Now, fake hunger, cravings, when you are a sugar addict, etc., that's a very different thing. But I'm never keen to fight hunger. Now, of course, there is a hunger that's going to appear when you shift from your ancient method where you were having early breakfast, etc., you will become hungry in the first part of the morning. Well, you will have, of course, to fight a little bit that feeling, but don't push it too much. I really think the secret to successfully implement intermittent fasting is to have a very progressive shift into the new timetable. So if you get hungry at 9 a.m. because you normally have your breakfast at 7:30, okay, well, you probably can resist until 9:30, okay, and that's going to be manageable. But don't push it too far. Take your time. Move from your possible 12:12 into 14:10. 14:10 is already a nice achievement. It's not optimal, but it means you're making progress. So, and if you're very hungry, well, you'll go from a 12:12 to a 13:11. That's already something. And then perhaps 1 month later, you move to 14:10. So hunger has to be obeyed. Now, a good way to distinguish fake hunger from real hunger is when you are very hungry, but if you manage to wait 15 minutes, it's gone. That's not a hunger that you need to take into account. That is what I would call a fake hunger. That's probably habit coming back. We are creatures of habit. So the habit is telling you, normally you would eat now. But if 15 minutes later you're not hungry anymore, that was not real hunger, that was habit. Another contraindication are children. I keep thinking children should eat before going to school. I'm not into intermittent fasting for children. And a third one, after pregnancy and children, is illness. I'm not comfortable with fasting when people are ill. Intermittent fasting is immune boosting because if you have a good gut, you have a good immune system. The large majority of immune cells, more than 2/3 of immune cells, are in the gut. So if your gut is healthy, your immune system will benefit from that. But if you are experiencing fever, flu-like symptoms, etc., well then, very different story. I am absolutely not comfortable with any form of fasting, and personally, that would be a disaster if I fight hunger when I'm a bit upset, under the weather, as we say. That's the best way to really become ill. So pregnancy, children, and illness are all circumstances where you would not do intermittent fasting. Alors, when I had the feedback from my French-speaking video about intermittent fasting, it makes me smile because, it may mean they have not really understood the message, because they were asking, so how often should I do that, or for how long? Well, it's a very healthy eating strategy. Ideally, you want to do that forever. I'm never going to go back to my breakfast. I was not having a breakfast as a teenager or a student at medical school in Liège, in Belgium. Never had breakfast. And, I was doing very well. And it's when I started to work in London in the early years of this century that I was really attacked by patients saying, "Oh, but Dr. Mouton, you haven't had a breakfast. What does that mean? You know, this is really not good for a doctor. You shouldn't be doing that." So at some point you start thinking, well, let's give the good example, which I genuinely thought was the case at that time, but of course it was not. But then to get rid of that habit, when I started to realize I was wrong, probably 7 years ago, it was very difficult. And when I found out later on that my OGG1 genotype was heterozygous variant, I had to do intermittent fasting to protect my DNA. Well, it's a fact that I have struggled. What I have used to help myself is that was really helpful, because otherwise I had headaches and was really feeling unwell in the first half of the morning without my breakfast, is that I had black coffee with salted butter or ghee. That helped. That really helped. And slowly but surely I've stopped that sort of alternative to the breakfast, because I was not hungry anymore. The headaches have slowly disappeared. When you fast, you may experience headaches which reflect detoxification, because when you start burning your fat and destroying fat cells, they release the poisons that were trapped in the fat, and those toxins, those xenobiotics, probably trigger the headache. And that was fascinating, in fact, because I knew, without going into too much details, that my fat cells were being used for fuel, and that was related to the headaches. Well, one way for feeling that was that you literally feel that you have less pressure at the belt level. Your belt is not as tight, which is a very good feeling and something you are really happy to experience. But that was accompanied by a headache. Good advice through all that intermittent fasting journey is to drink a lot. You have to drink a lot. You have water, of course, not alcohol. To drink a lot of water, that helps, fights the headache, flushes the toxins. That's really a good idea. Yeah, it's pretty steep here, This is not a joke. And look at the landscape. See, my village is up there. And, well, there we go. No, Goliath, not that way, because then we will have for 3 hours of walk this way. Okay, so what else should I warn you about? The OGG1 genotype that I mentioned several times, when variant, is helped by intermittent fasting. I should also profit by this occasion to underline that exercise is helpful as well. So it's always a very good idea to have some level of exercise. Well, not a stage of the Tour de France. That's not something you should be doing fasting. But a normal session, gym, 1 hour of gym, cycling, 1-2 hours of cycling, not too intense, just easy ride, okay? Running, half an hour, perhaps even more, depending on how fit you are. All those things are really interesting to be done fasting. Drinking a lot of water. You can have a black coffee before, if you want, before going out. That helps, You wake up, you want a bit of a boost. When I say black coffee, of course, it can be a black tea or a green tea. Huh? All that is possible. Goliath is is resting in the shade. Look how cute. Well, you know, with his all his knee device, you know, it's a bit hot and it's a bit more tiring. He's doing well. So this exercise at the end of your fasting time is amazingly helpful. And that really delivers fat burning, and especially fat burning around the middle. I think he wants to go back to the wood. Allez, viens, viens, so fat burning around the middle is going to be enhanced by intermittent fasting and by exercising at the end of that fasting time. And it will really help you lose weight, but weight around the middle. You know, this visceral fat that you see because of your waistline that's too large, and abdominal fat, you could call it that way as well, and perhaps fatty liver, which is often associated with visceral fat. Fatty liver is a form of visceral fat. So that's probably the number one reason for people undergoing intermittent fasting strategy. However, I have found out more and more obviously that people who have digestive issues, all those gut problems I was mentioning previously, should try intermittent fasting even if they have a perfect weight, or even if they don't want to lose weight, because you're probably not going to lose weight if you don't have weight to lose. So for my concern, the two major indications are weight loss, but this inflammatory fat from the middle to be lost, and digestive issues, because I have noticed that intermittent fasting is probably the most powerful way to address your digestive problems, and it may deliver amazing outcomes even when you have tried everything else, from probiotics to, you know, specific diets, restrictive diets, or taking digestive enzymes, or all sorts of supplements, microbial cleanses, you know. Would it be prescriptive prescriptive antifungals, prescriptive antibacterials, or herbal cleanses? All of that helps, but you know what? Patients may not have full relief from all of that applied really scrupulously for long periods of time, and then they embark on intermittent fasting, and that solves their problems, which is, you know, a big lesson for a doctor like me who has always worked in the field of intestinal health, and I was probably not using my best tool, which was intermittent fasting. Interestingly, in that field, there's another little genotype that's very useful to consider, which is FUT2, fucosyltransferase 2 gene. In that specific gene, only homozygous variant patients who have two bad copies of the gene are in trouble. If you have one bad copy, it's okay, you still have the function. But those who have two bad copies, they do not manage protecting their gut with fucose, which means they are much more prone to dysbiosis, gut inflammation, etc. So those patients can be problematic, and that's probably a gene which is worth testing when the digestion does not improve with intermittent fasting. Good. So what else would intermittent fasting bring? It's certainly going to help you massively to fight insulin resistance, to fight prediabetes and diabetes, of course, type 2. Diabetes type 1, that's something that's full-blown disease. That's not something you want to address too much with intermittent fasting. I mean, that's beyond the scope of this video, okay? So that's probably another contraindication, diabetes type 1. But diabetes type 2, that doesn't require insulin, well, that's going to be immensely helpful. Those patients with excessive glycosylated hemoglobin, HbA1c, can also benefit massively, because you will switch from oscillating blood glucose level into something much more stable. So reducing insulin levels, fighting insulin resistance, of course, obeys to the same principle. I would also recommend intermittent fasting to people who are always hungry, become faint, etc., because that reflects an oscillating blood glucose. And there's nothing more powerful to fight these oscillations than intermittent fasting. In fact, intermittent fasting will switch anyone from a carb burning setting to the capacity to burn fats. So to switch someone who's a carb burner into a fat burner, intermittent fasting is amazingly powerful. So you see, that's a lot of indications for sure. So many people can benefit from that strategy. Alors, you know what? I had my notes from look at this document. The dog is taking a little rest in the shadow. I had my notes from the webinar. And because I'm improvising this, in the middle of the forest, I just want to check if I've covered everything. But it seems that I've been pretty thorough. The two take-home messages, that's how I finished my French-speaking webinar, were be progressive, okay? So don't embark if you feel enthusiastic after this video, which I hope you will feel. Don't go too fast. Please go step by step, because again, we are creatures of habit. The body is not going to be too happy if you make a brutal change, even if it's for the good. Changes will be resisted, so you have to go step by step. Otherwise, that's probably the only reason for which you would fail, because people normally should not fail. And once you are on an intermittent fasting scheme, you don't go back. You don't go back. You feel well. You see a lot of advantages. You just stick to it. You may fluctuate, and if you have a difficult period of time, of course, your fasting time is going to shrink, and that's not a big problem. And when you feel strong enough again to go back to better habits, well, then you'll emphasize your fasting time, and you'll go back to your 16:8 or 18:6, if that's what you have managed to do. So those things can fluctuate to a point, but people who have discovered the marvels of intermittent fasting, usually they don't go back to their previous system. Nobody does. I certainly won't. And probably the very last thing, is beware of those dogmas. Beware of what you have always been told to do, because that's how you should do it, without any solid scientific justification. It's like the food pyramid, the food pyramid where you have 65% of your food that should come from carbs, which represent the foundation of that pyramid. What's that nonsense? That's complete nonsense, invented by the agricultural lobby in the US in the late 1970s, just to fix their overproduction of corn and wheat and cereals more globally. And of course, that has zero scientific background. So don't believe all these urban myths. Generally, they're fake. They obey to some money logic, and they are promoted by some lobby for some bad reason. Don't listen to that. Your early breakfast with your cereals that are melted with cow's milk, and of course low fat or non-fat cow's milk, and that's supposed to be a healthy breakfast. Well, there's nothing healthy in that habit, not even the breakfast. Let's use that as our conclusion. I'm going to say bye-bye. Thank you for your attention, hoping you've gone through the whole thing. And we say bye-bye to Goliath, who's very patiently waiting for me to finish the walk. But I think we have finished the video, and I hope I will have helped some of you. Bye-bye.